Imagine this, an African army advances through the south of Egypt. The cities burn, Roman soldiers are captured, and the bronze head of Emperor Augustus is torn from its statue, dragged through the desert and buried beneath the steps of a sacred temple, so that everyone who enters must step on the face of the Caesar. This is not a legend. It is a historical fact that Rome tried to bury under centuries of silence, because that defeat was a humiliation. A wound that didn't occur in the forest of Germania, but in the burning heart of Africa. Today, we will discover how the mighty Roman Empire was defeated by an African kingdom, led by a woman, a blind queen in one eye, but with enough vision to crush imperial arrogance. I'll tell you how Amanirenas, the Queen of Kush, faced the Roman legions, defied Augustus himself, and achieved the unthinkable, forcing the most famous emperor in Rome to withdraw his troops, cancel his taxes, and admit defeat. And stay tuned, because this story has it all: war, betrayal, revenge, and when who dared to say no to the most feared empire in the world. The year 30 BC. Cleopatra is dead. Mark Antony is also dead. The Roman Empire has triumphed over the last great symbol of Egyptian resistance, and Octavian, Caesar said, enters Alexandria not as a conqueror, but as the absolute master of the Mediterranean world. But instead of becoming Pharaoh, Octavian does something colder, more calculated. He turns Egypt into his personal property, not just a province, but a territory under his direct control, bypassing the Senate. Why? Because Egypt had something Rome needed more than gold: wheat, wealth, and strategic position. To protect this jewel, the young leader, soon to be known as Augustus, stations 3 Roman legions in the country. Around 15,000 soldiers based in Alexandria, Thebes, and the southern border, guarding the empire's boundaries. But Augustus doesn't trust anyone. The threat of civil war still looms, so he makes a crucial decision and centralizes the command of the Egyptian army directly into his own hands. And to execute this, he appoints a loyal ally, Gaius Cornelius Gallus, a poet, a cultured man, and an ambitious military leader. Gaius doesn't take long to prove his loyalty. He suppresses internal rebellions, takes fortresses on the southern border, and writes his name across Egypt, in temples, walls, even on the pyramids. He proclaims himself sovereign, hero, invincible commander. But there is a problem. In Rome, there is only room for one man with glory. And that man is Augustus. The emperor, jealous and paranoid, sees in Gallus not a servant, but a threat. He strips him of his belongings. He isolates him politically. And Gallus, humiliated, commits suicide. This marks the beginning of a chain of imperial mistakes. Rome loses its first Egyptian governor and replaces him with a more docile man, Gallus, less ambitious but also less prepared. The new governor fails in an expedition to Arabia and makes a fatal mistake. He sends troops from southern Egypt, far from the border, weakening defenses just as the enemy was about to attack. That enemy did not come from Germania, nor from the eastern desert. It came from the south, from the kingdom of Kush. While Rome consumed itself in paranoia and power struggles, to the south of the Nile rose an ancient, fierce, and proud kingdom, the kingdom of Kush. This millennial civilization had been a neighbor of pharaonic Egypt for centuries. They had fought each other, exchanged culture, blood, and gods. In fact, for a time, Kush even conquered Egypt. And now, they had no intention of submitting to their new Roman masters. Rome, drunk on power, had made a grave mistake, imposing taxes on territories that were considered sacred to Kush. Land that did not belong to the empire, but that Roman governors claimed as their own. It was then that a towering figure rose, a woman with one eye, but with a vision that would eclipse any emperor. Her name was Amanirenas, Queen Mother, strategist, commander, spiritual, and military leader of a proud people who would not bow to the symbols of Rome. Amanirenas did not wait for the Romans to strike first. Taking advantage of the withdrawal of the legions to Arabia, she launched a lightning offensive. In 24 BC, she crossed the first cataract of the Nile and swept through the fortresses of Phyle, Elefantina, and Siena, penetrating imperial territory with unstoppable force. Her troops plundered, burned, captured Roman soldiers, and took thousands of Egyptians as prisoners. But the most symbolic act was this. In one of those cities, they found a statue of Emperor Augustus. They decapitated it, and they took its bronze head as a trophy. Years later, in 1910, archaeologists found that same head buried beneath the steps of the Temple of Amun in Meroe, the capital of Kush. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. Every time someone entered the temple, they had to step on the face of Augustus. A public humiliation, a cultural victory, and a direct challenge to the authority of the most powerful man in the world. Rome had just received a slap that neither its generals nor its propaganda could ignore. The Roman Empire was not used to losing, and much less to losing to an African kingdom led by a woman. But that's exactly what happened. While the emperors dreamed of dominating Germania, Parthia, or Arabia, the southern border of Egypt was burning. The fortresses of Philae and Elefantina, once symbols of Roman power, were now in ruins. The Kushite army had not only defeated the local troops, they had also humiliated Augustus himself, decapitating his statue and parading his head through the desert sands as if it were a hunting trophy. Rome, wounded in its pride, could not sit idly by. So the new governor, Publius Petronius, gathered a retaliatory army, more than 10 million Roman soldiers, trained, disciplined, well-armed, and thirsty for revenge. The offensive was brutal. Petronius marched south, taking city after city. And although the Kushites had an overwhelming numerical advantage, more than 30,000 warriors, the tactical precision of the Roman legions began to tip the balance. The Romans captured Piselchis. They took control of the navigable stretch of the Nile. They cut off the enemy's supply, and finally they reached Napata, the ancient capital of the kingdom of Kush. Amanirenas offered peace, but Petronius refused to listen. He razed the city. He captured hundreds of citizens, destroyed temples, and left a Roman garrison in enemy territory, extending the imperial border into Lower Nubia. For Rome, it was a victory. For Kush, a devastating blow. But not the end, because although their capital was in ruins, their spirit was not. And Amanirenas had not said her last word. After the destruction of Napata, many believed it was all over, that Rome had once again imposed its dominance with fire and iron. But they were wrong, because Kush was not just another province, and Amanirenas was not a queen who surrendered easily. The Kushites, far from disappearing, counterattacked. They gathered new allied tribes. They reorganized their army, and as a final act of defiance, they expelled the Roman garrison from Pselkis, reclaiming part of their territory. It was then that both sides, exhausted and aware of their limits, were forced to consider the unthinkable: peace. In 21 BC, Amanirenas sent emissaries to negotiate directly with Rome. But Petronius, perhaps remembering the tragic fate of his predecessor, Gaius Gallus, decided not to make the decision himself. Instead, he advised that the negotiations be elevated to the only authority capable of deciding, Emperor Augustus. At that moment, the emperor was on the island of Samos, negotiating with Parthia, Rome's greatest eastern rival, a much closer and more dangerous threat. So, in a gesture that surprised many, Augustus accepted the Kushite terms. He ordered the withdrawal of Roman troops from Lower Nubia and cancelled or lowered the taxes imposed by his governors, and signed a treaty that recognized the independence of Kush. Why did he do it? Weakness, convenience, strategy? Historians still debate. But the truth is that Augustus knew he could not fight on two fronts at the same time. And that closing to Parthia would be much costlier than negotiating with an African queen who had proven to be as capable as any Roman general. Rome saved its honor. Kush retained its territory, its power, and something even more valuable, its dignity. Rome wrote its history in statues, marble and poetry, and like every empire, it chose what to remember and what to bury in silence. The war against Kush does not appear in the great triumphant narratives. There are no triumphal arches, no commemorative stelae, no portraits of Amanirenas in the Vatican museums, but the bronze head of Augustus, buried beneath the temple of Ammon, is still there as an eternal witness to an uncomfortable truth. Rome lost. The most powerful empire in the world had to retreat before an African army, led by a woman. A queen blind in one eye, but capable of clearly seeing what emperors, senators and generals did not want to accept. That dignity does not surrender, that military power does not always win, and that there are battles won not with weapons, but with resistance, pride, and an unbreakable will. For centuries Kush prospered. Never again did it pay tribute to Rome, and its commercial alliance with the empire brought benefits to both peoples. Meanwhile, to the north, new wars consuming entire legions. Gaul dimmed away, borders collapsed. But in the south, the peace Amanirenas had won with blood lasted for generations. Half a century later, Emperor Nero dreamed of a new expedition to the heart of Africa. He sent explorers, maps, and elite soldiers. But then he committed suicide. And with him, Rome's ambition over Kush died forever. Today, that story remains forgotten in most history books, but not in the memory of those who know how to look beyond marble and laurels.
Did you know this story? What other hidden victories do you think have been erased by the victors? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. And don't forget that sometimes empires fall, but those who resist remain forever.